Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Aisha Subarkash. The UN World Food Programme has a grim warning. The fallout from Russia's attack on Ukraine will go far beyond their borders. Russia is the world's #1 exporter of wheat, and Ukraine is in the top 5. This month, the cash crop saw a 40% increase in prices. And the expected scarcity in the coming months could put the world's most vulnerable at further risk. Hadia Alalawi reports.
The impact of the conflict in Ukraine is being felt far beyond its borders. Russia and Ukraine account for about 30% of the global wheat exports. Last week, wheat prices soared to their highest levels in 14 years. Food inflation is also rising following disruption in regional supply chains. According to the International Monetary Fund, global inflation hit a 7-year high with an increase in January of 7.8%. The expulsion of several Russian banks from the international SWIFT banking system is expected to hit the country's exports hard, cutting off supplies and driving up prices even more. The UN's World Food Programme warns that the conflict will impact millions living in what they described as hunger hotspots, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa. Lebanon and Yemen will also likely feel the burden as a large share of their imports come from Russia and Ukraine, along with Egypt, the largest importer of wheat in the world, with more than half of all imports coming from Ukraine and Russia.
Our reserves will drop, and instead of supporting our needs for 4 years from now, it will be only enough for 2 to 3 months. The crisis will impact us, and we will suffer from these wheat shortages.
Egyptian officials say they are in the process of looking for suppliers from other countries.
Because of the proximity, so we can start looking at Europe. But we will not exclude other exporters, like the US, like Kazakhstan, like Romania.
Turkey is also likely to be affected by this crisis. Although it produces half of the wheat it consumes, 85% of its imports come from Russia and Ukraine. And according to official figures, Ankara's wheat imports from Ukraine alone reached record levels in 2021. With the spike in wheat prices, global demand is shifting to alternative grains such as barley and corn, of which Russia and Ukraine are also major suppliers. Ukraine provides about 50% of the global supply of corn and more than 60% of Europe's. An increased demand has driven up prices more than 20% this year. But this isn't the only issue. In addition to grain prices, Russia and Belarus are the world's leading producers of fertilizer, and farmers there are also likely to take a hit as a result of international sanctions. 2 weeks into the Ukrainian conflict, it is still unclear just how far its ripple effect will be felt or how damaging it could be. Hadia Alalawi, Straight Talk.
And to discuss how the conflict in Ukraine could impact global wheat supplies, joining me now from Konya, Turkey, is Sevim Seda Yamac. She is an associate professor at the Konya Food and Agriculture University. And from St. Gallen, Switzerland, Guido Cozzi. He is a professor of economics at the University of St. Gallen. A warm welcome to you both, and thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. Guido, how has the conflict over Ukraine impacted the global wheat supplies already? What is the current situation, and are things going to get worse?
Well, the global supply has been impacted, especially through the prices, which have already massively increased for oil, for gas, for commodities, for wheat, for corn, and also the retouring of flights and movements of transportation means has also impacted it massively.
So which countries, Sevim, will be impacted the most? And do you believe that they have been caught off guard? And what kind of measures from now on can be taken to stave off this crisis, even preventing it to get worse?
As we know that wheat is a strategic crop, especially the MENA countries, North Africa and the Middle East countries, 50% of the cereals are depending on this exportation of these countries. So this countries already suffers with most of the parts of the countries, most of the part of these regions are suffering from the malnutrition and the hungers. If they cannot reach enough, that will be a big problem. But if we should think about the long term, short term, there will be manageable because we are looking the last year's they were exported already the last year's products. No, so now the agriculture season is coming, so they have to plant it or they have to look the bee plant to import it in another countries.
So, Guido, are we likely to see mass disruptions to global food supplies unless hostilities between Ukraine and Russia end?
I'm afraid so, also because there are direct consequences of the conflict. For example, the refugee crisis, which is going to flood Europe with millions of refugees, putting public finances under severe strain, adding deficits and debt. Also, the effects of the sanctions could turn to be very, very hard for the countries that are imposing the sanctions themselves. For example, Germany, depending for 40% of its oil from Russia and 50% for its gas, would be very severely impacted if it imposed the sanctions.
So, Sevim, in the first few months of the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, wheat prices surged by 80%. And this latest crisis came on top of this tight global supplies. Hasn't the COVID-19 pandemic taught us anything?
Yes, we should learn. We should learn it from the COVID-19 because COVID-19 teach us how to behave very fastly for these situations, and also agricultural products depending on the seasons. So countries who are depending on other countries' agricultural commodities, they will suffer. We saw it already in COVID-19 cases. So countries should take their own precautions, and they have to think about always. They have to be a B plan.
Okay, I just want to read a quote from the executive director for the UN World Food Programme, David Beasley. We have no choice but to take food from the hungry to feed the starving, and unless we receive immediate funding in a few weeks, we risk not even being able to feed the starving. This will be hell on earth. So, Guido, talk to us about the ripple effects of this food crisis on the region, as well as the Middle East and Africa, which are heavily reliant on imported goods.
Absolutely. Take, for example, Egypt. It imports 70% of its wheat from Russia, and this is vital for 20% of the population. So if Egypt is not able to import wheat from Russia any longer, more than 20 million people would not have their bread loaf and may be at risk of starvation. Similarly, for other countries depending on Ukraine for wheat and corn, which is also important for feeding the animals and therefore for meat, and many other products.
So what's the solution here? What should be done collectively?
Collectively, in my opinion, we should carefully modulate the sanctions. For example, Egypt is not blocking export from Russia. Sanctions may work, but only if they convince Russia to stop the war very soon. Otherwise, they may turn to be devastating and creating even more victims than the war itself, especially for countries in North Africa, in the MENA region, which are also flooded with refugees themselves.
So, Sevim, what are the dangers that lie ahead for these countries that Guido just mentioned? Could rising food prices trigger social unrest and maybe lead to mass displacements in the region?
For sure, that because they are already totally depending on the exportation, the strategic crops, like the barley, maize, sunflower, especially the wheat. So there will be the big problem because the countries has already economical some problems. Most of the countries in that regions, so the price is increasing crazy. So there will be malnutrition problem, and for sure that there will be more hunger problem in these regions. That's the biggest problem, actually, to not reach a food.
So apart from those countries, Sevim, what could you tell us about Turkey's dependence on both Ukraine and Russia when it comes to wheat and sunflower imports? Will it be affected a lot? Are there any alternatives to Turkey's needs?
Turkey, as I told you, that in 2021 products, the Ukraine and Russia already, most of them they exported. Short term, there will be not a big problem, but last year we had a drought problem. Then the fertilizer price was increased.
Yes.
So this could be in the new year, in the new coming agriculture season. Now we are entering. Government should really take care about these topics, and we are seeing that in the last few days they are really getting important precautions about these topics. And
Yes.
because if we can.
So, Guido, Russia is also known as the world's biggest producer of processed fertilizer, and now it has called its producers to stop these exports. Is Russia weaponizing this crucial export to get back at the West? And how crucial is Russian fertilizers to global supply chains?
It is. Also, because this is indeed the sowing season for several types of wheat and corn, and also fertilizers are important to increase production. So if fertilizers are not available, the production technology will be deprived of a super important input that would be equivalent to a reduction in agricultural productivity, a very, very negative shock in agricultural productivity, taking it back for several decades in the past in terms of efficiency, with very strong consequences on global supply.
So, Sevim, what happens if this conflict lasts throughout 2022?
Yeah, if they cannot planted these crops, in that time, 2020, we will see the food crisis actually, because now most of the agricultural products, the season is coming. So the price is also increasing if they cannot do the management, also application of the fertilizer, even the lasting crops, or if they cannot do application of the fertilizers or pesticides. Also, the amount of the food will decrease, and it will impact the prices for sure. And globally, people cannot reach it.
Well, this situation looks quite grim. Guido, Sevim, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.
You're very welcome.
Welcome.